It was 1 year ago today we first broadcast the body camera video seen across the country. An innocent social worker wrongly raided by the Chicago Police Department. Traumatizing moments. The city's law department fought in federal court to stop from airing. They didn't want you to see it, but she did. Tonight, Anjanette Young is nearing a multi-million-dollar settlement with the city, but several other families are still waiting for closure in their wrong raid cases. It's a long and expensive road. And as CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini uncovered, the cost to them and to you is about more than just money.
Connie, do you know the difference between telling the truth and telling a lie?
Yes.
These children,
How old are you, Daviana?
6.
have had their front doors broken down and homes invaded.
And at this time, would you please raise your right hand for the oath?
Guns pointed at them, their siblings, or their parents.
Do you believe that there's any reason you wouldn't be able to tell us the truth today?
There's no reason I could tell the truth.
You are watching those children being deposed by lawyers defending the city of Chicago. Multiple police misconduct lawsuits have been filed, accusing officers of wrongly raiding innocent families and mistreating them too.
Still hurts to watch.
That video from the body-worn cameras of heavily armed police. Peter Mendez's apartment was raided in 2017 when he was just 9. The real target lived in the apartment upstairs.
You believe a gun was pointed at you?
Yes.
You were laying on the floor face down though, right?
Yes. Well, I was, but then I could look up.
What happened to Peter Mendez is part of a disturbing pattern of wrong raids the CBS 2 investigators exposed over the last 4 years.
Are you okay, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
His little brother Jack was just 5 at the time of their raid.
Could you promise me that when we're doing this, you won't lie?
No, I don't like.
To see these kids go through this is hard for you.
It's absolutely hard for me.
Anjanette Young's home was wrongly raided while she was naked and changing into pajamas in 2019.
Let's go talk outside.
The man police were looking for lived in the apartment next door.
It's so disheartening for me to hear that these children are being,
Are you doing okay?
traumatized over and over again as they continue through this process of seeking justice.
I just can't wait to get out of here.
That justice for many families often comes in the form of a civil lawsuit.
Can we take a break if that's okay?
You're doing great, buddy.
I'm about to go home too.
Today, the CBS 2 investigators have tracked more than a dozen lawsuits related to wrong raids, families who sued the city because of moments like this.
He gave us the wrong part.
They just had their weapons. They just aimed at us.
16-year-old Amani Booth was 13 when his home was wrongly raided in 2018.
Were the officers inside the house much taller than you?
Yes.
His brother Legend was 8.
They said get the out, like a mean way though.
Now, because his family is suing the city, he, his siblings, and kids from other wrong raid lawsuits are required to sit through lengthy depositions like this.
You were talking earlier about guns. You remember that?
Yes.
Like the raid on Daviana Simmons' home with her mom and grandma inside.
Yeah.
Listen as city lawyers start asking her about things that have nothing to do with the wrong raid.
How often do you see your dad?
Not all the time.
Not all the time? Does he come by for your birthday sometimes?
No.
So to ask a young child, about her absent father brings no value to the case, but it continues to cause systematic harm to the individual.
Young not only shares their pain, but she's also a licensed social worker who helps people experiencing trauma. She's now finalizing a $2.9 million lawsuit settlement against the city.
This is not right.
And says the legal fight to prove emotional damage and physical harm is a brutal business.
Have you ever had to be under punishment before?
Yes.
You know what a spanking or a whooping is?
Yes.
Have you ever gotten one before?
The city spent $930,000 in legal fees to private law firms to fight the Simmons case, then another $2.5 million to settle it, for a total of $3.4 million.
If you know, does your father own a firearm?
No, he doesn't.
A lawyer for the city asks him whether his dad owned a gun, even though his father had nothing to do with the raid.
They got a warrant in their hand.
Remember, it was the wrong home. The city has already spent more than $330,000 to defend this case.
I mean you absolutely no disrespect with this question. I just need to ask this to cover this fact. Have you ever been detained or arrested?
No.
Was his gun still out when he came back in the living room?
I don't recall. Can we please take a break if that's okay?
But you kicked down doors of people that you're not sure.
The Mendez family filed their wrong raid lawsuit all the way back in 2018. Since then, the city has spent more than $420,000 defending that case and the officers involved, and it continues to rack up fees. These depositions you're seeing cost thousands of dollars.
Have you ever been afraid of the dark before this incident?
No.
Since 2015, the city has paid private law firms more than $2.5 million in just legal fees to defend these wrong raid cases.
And it needs a complete overhaul in a way that will be fair to all citizens and all families in the city of Chicago.
And it's not just about tax dollars. Young says there needs to be real reform.
I absolutely think that my case was fast-tracked because of the publicity.
Just relax, all right?
She believes there needs to be accountability, like in her case, and she questions why none of these other cases, which all predated her raid, have resulted in a completed COPA or Civilian Office of Police Accountability investigation.
It's heartbreaking because a lot of these cases happened before my incident, but I've gotten more resolution than they have, and it's just not fair.
COPA is telling us a few of these cases will be finalized early next year. No one from the city will comment on pending litigation, and the mayor says she's committed to moving these cases through the process. Dave Savini, CBS 2 Investigators.
They've done it again. This surveillance image of Chicago police raiding a family's home might have gone under the radar, except for one detail: when it was taken. 11 days after the city publicly announced reforms to the way officers get and obtain search warrants.
Yeah, it was a great show, great speech. But as CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini reveals, it seems the raid teams didn't get the message.
They treated us like we were below them.
Any individuals found within a location where a search warrant is executed must be treated with dignity and respect.
The mayor's pledge. Do you feel like they should have treated your family with more respect?
Yeah.
And the police superintendent's vow.
So the real question you're asking is if treating someone with respect gets in the way of doing our job. And the answer is no.
Promises of reform made after the CBS 2 investigators exposed dozens of bad raids on innocent families over the last 3 years.
We are going to get this right.
That was March 3rd. But just 11 days later,
I never got treated like that by anybody in my entire life.
this happened. A raid team that we found violated Chicago police policy hits a home in Bridgeport with so much force the entire structure shakes.
We're still in our pajamas, just lounging around.
It was a Sunday morning and George Garcia's birthday. His wife Kimberly and their 2 children, 12-year-old Georgie and 3-year-old Cruzy, were excited to celebrate. And then what happened?
All of a sudden, I just hear my whole house shaking and a big bang.
Videos from the Garcia's home security system show police pulling up, a team of officers with guns and a battering ram heading to the side door to break it down. Only problem? The search warrant they are holding was not properly approved.
I just heard like boom, boom, boom.
Even before that March 3rd news conference, Chicago police policy required a lieutenant or above verify and approve all search warrants. Now the city says it's an even higher rank, a deputy chief who must sign off on a warrant before a judge does.
These are just some of the new pre-execution safeguards that must be followed before a search warrant can ever be presented to the state's attorney or to a court.
But none of that happened in the Garcia raid. Armed with that warrant in question, police kept ramming the door. Garcia, worried it might fall on him, ran to a window to talk to police. So you were yelling out of a top window?
Yes. Stop hitting the door. I will open it. And I said, hey guys, I'm trying to open the door for you guys.
Hey guys! Guys, I'm trying to door! Open the door!
Then they told him not to move.
Stay right there! Let me stay right there! Make sure we still hands. No problem. Stay right there. They're breaking the door. Hey, no, come on, hey, let me see. The door's already open.
Once inside, the raid team headed to the second floor and burst into Garcia's apartment. What was the first thing you saw?
A gun.
Then they say they tried to get to their youngest child, Cruzy.
And I'm just trying to get to my kid.
Do you see it?
I just play it over and over again.
And they just put the gun to my head and told me to turn around.
Which brings us to the city's next promise: immediate changes to how vulnerable people, especially children, will be treated during raids.
The guns were pointed at your brother and your mom.
Yeah, my dad.
Georgie Garcia says he and his little brother ended up in another room.
2 children are screaming, screaming for their parents.
So the whole time you were put in that room, you couldn't get to your mom and dad?
Yeah.
And you were scared?
I felt scared. I didn't want him to see me crying.
You were trying to console your brother?
I had to stay strong for him, so I kept my emotions and just protected him.
And then there's this. The city also promised to address one of its most widespread failures we uncovered during our multi-year investigation into wrong raids. Long before their news conference in March, it was CPD policy never to base a search warrant solely on the word of a confidential informant. But the Garcia warrant is based solely on the word of a confidential informant. There's no mention of any actual police work, no undercover drug buys, no surveillance, no verification at all that drugs were being sold out of the apartment before police burst in. Later, we see these images. The entire apartment ransacked, personal belongings and toys wrecked.
They're not doing their job. That's just it. They're just using their own system however they want, however they see fit.
The warrant only gave them the power to search Garcia's apartment on the 2nd floor of this multi-unit building, but when they found nothing, they started to search the garage and other units too.
It makes no sense. I was sleeping, not minding my own business.
Officers searched the 1st floor where Michael Zastro was in bed. You can even hear the raid team talking about how it was someone else's place.
And what's this, somebody else's apartment? Yeah.
They pulled me out the room and then they started searching my whole room and the whole apartment.
And this wasn't just any raid team. All of the officers on this raid belonged to Police Superintendent David Brown's newly created Community Safety Team, formed last year during the height of unrest and widespread calls for reform, as a way to not only fight crime, but to improve trust between police and the public.
They were just laughing the whole time, like it was funny, like this was some kind of sick joke to them.
Then came the final humiliation.
They went through your underwear drawer.
And not just through it, like they were holding it.
And showing it.
Yeah, like putting it up and then like giving me looks and like smirking.
But the hardest part of the raid, they say, is what it did to the children, especially Cruzy.
Does he talk about seeing the guns?
Yeah, he keeps on saying monsters, and he goes like this. He's like, monsters, monsters.
In that moment, while you're handcuffed and you couldn't put your arms around your kids, what did that do to you?
They get all emotional and you can't do nothing. You can't comfort them. You can't give them a hug. You can't tell mommy's going to be okay because you don't know what's happening.
And then when they left, did they say, we're sorry?
No, they said happy birthday. And we asked them what happens with the doors. And they said he's in construction. He can figure it out himself.
The officer who got the warrant and the sergeant in charge of the raid have a combined 86 disciplinary complaint investigations, 4 of them sustained, 2 apiece. The Civilian Office of Police Accountability is now investigating what happened during the Garcia raid. Dave Savini, CBS 2 Investigators.
In a written statement tonight, Chicago police say they, quote, immediately referred this incident to COPA, but a source familiar with the raid tells us CPD only brought it to COPA's attention after we started asking questions and submitting public records requests. Dave has, of course, done extensive reporting on the pattern of botched raids by Chicago police over the last several years. To see this award-winning body of work that's finally leading to promises of reform, visit cbschicago.com/unwarranted. CBS 2 investigators are about to show you terrifying moments when Chicago police confront 2 innocent teens. Officers confronted them more than once.
Even though neither committed any crime. Dave Savini documents what else the hours of footage reveal about that night.
We're in apartment 3D. Apartment 3D, David.
It was right before Christmas.
Through the years, Christmas Eve was a special night for Quarnita James and her 2 sons.
Everybody was happy.
Always a beautifully decorated tree and lots of photos of Christmas sweaters, funny hats, and hugs for as long as 16-year-old Jalen and 13-year-old Lazarick can remember. But there's one Christmas Eve the family wants to forget.
It makes me sad that they even had to go through something like that.
It's 8:09 p.m., December 24th, 2019. Juanita says her teens suddenly find police beating on their door.
Okay, listen, at some point this door's gonna be broken open, and you will be dragged out.
Jalen, her oldest son, opens it and is greeted with handguns.
Hey, get down on the ground, on your knees.
The gun is aimed at his head when police wrongly target him as they barge into their apartment without a warrant.
It happened so fast. I just remember opening the door and then being in handcuffs on the ground in the hallway.
As scared as Jalen was, he was more afraid for someone else. Terrified of what officers might do.
Do you have a gun? No, Come out! Get on your knees!
At gunpoint, they order Lazarick, who was just a 7th grader at the time, to the floor. What are you feeling at that moment?
Honestly, I was scared because I was like, okay, anything could happen at this moment.
Do you think you might have been killed that night?
I very easily could have been killed that night.
What you've just witnessed is just one encounter between police and the teens that night. It all happened here at this apartment complex near the red line at the Loyola University stop. The CBS 2 investigators have now obtained body camera footage of an unbelievable 20 minutes that led up to their terrifying ordeal.
Who started this? What happened?
Those body cam videos,
Originally came as a suspicious person. 6 male blacks in the stairwell.
plus police dispatch radio transmissions, now reveal how several other innocent young black males in the area were also targeted that same night.
Do we have anything besides them being a suspicious person?
Listen as a sergeant heading to the scene wants more information.
They said, what are they being chased for? Suspicious person? Is that all we got?
The confusion about who police are chasing and why gets even worse for Jalen.
Did it seem to you like they were disorganized that night?
Very. When you run into officers as many times as I did, they're disorganized.
Disorganized because when Jalen was held at gunpoint, it was actually the 4th time he was confronted by police that night. 20 minutes earlier, around 7:47 p.m., was the first time police take him down. It's hard to see in the darkness, but that's him getting tackled.
So I immediately put my hands up. They bring me down, cuff me right here.
He was a junior at Sullivan High School at the time and a standout football player and champion wrestler. He says to avoid the possibility of getting shot by police, he made sure he did not resist.
I was always taught to always respect them and never run, never talk back, never do these things to the police. But that was because of what they do to people like me. So
people like you?
Yeah, black teenagers.
It screams misconduct.
Al Hofeld Jr. is the family's attorney.
I think it's a way of policing that's dehumanizing and frankly racist.
He is then questioned about guns and if he really lives here in Rogers Park.
What's your name, man?
He gives his name and address.
I live upstairs.
But they don't believe him, and while handcuffed, take his keys from his pocket, go through his building and open his apartment door.
This is it?
And then they let him go.
Yeah, we apologize, man. It's just bad timing, man, Wrong place, wrong time, all right? But that's why I had them uncuff you right away.
But after that apology, a few blocks away, Jalen is again stopped by police. He's cleared again, but as he heads back to his apartment complex, another team of officers is still on the hunt, searching someone else's unit. Listen as they admit they have no clue who they are looking for.
What are these guys wanted for? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
But as they leave, they see Jalen, who is going back to his apartment. It's the 3rd time Jalen gets stopped and questioned by police that night.
I just talked to the police.
Eventually, they let him go upstairs through the back door. And that's when these cops came banging at the front door.
Get down on the ground.
You remember them, the officers who forced him to the ground at gunpoint.
Don't do this again.
Eventually, a sergeant arrived and told the officers to let both minors go. But when they asked officers why they used force on them, police told them this.
Don't bitch. So's your boy. He's getting cold for Christmas.
What does it say to you that one of them would make a final comment saying, you're going to get coal for Christmas?
It makes you feel disgusted. It's very belittling to just diminish what I went through.
The family filed a formal police misconduct case 2 years ago. And the Chicago Police Department, they say they can't comment because it's all still being investigated by the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. In the Loop, Dave Savini, CBS 2 Investigators.
During this investigation, we also discovered one of the officers who entered the family's apartment that night had a logo embroidered on his uniform. It's the skull symbol that often represents the Punisher, an anti-hero in a popular Marvel comic series. There's a lot of debate right now about whether the logo is a hate symbol. Read up on its history and why CPD has actually banned it. It's in the CBS 2 Investigators section of our CBS Chicago app.
I just put my hands up and prayed that he wouldn't shoot me.
2 years after Anjanette Young stood naked in her own living room, handcuffed and surrounded by a team of male Chicago police officers, her ordeal could lead to major policy changes related to raids. The CBS 2 investigators have learned an ordinance that would overhaul how officers obtain and execute search warrants will be introduced to the City Council Wednesday. It's called the Anjanette Young Ordinance.
So it's great that it's named after me, but it's more important that it passes. It's more important that the city uses it in the proper way.
The footage made it relatable. Personally, like as a black woman.
Chicago Alderwoman Maria Haddon is one of the sponsors.
Shame for her, for us, like for black women, for the city of Chicago, a lot of anger and a lot of confusion and frustration.
Young's raid is one of more than 50 botched raids the CBS 2 investigators uncovered during our more than 2-year-long probe. Dozens of people, including children, had guns pointed at them or were handcuffed because police failed to do the proper research, failed to verify addresses, and just took the word of paid informants in getting their warrants.
And these wrong raids, time after time, are examples of rules not being followed, protocol not being followed, and everyday Chicagoans having their civil and human rights violated.
In the case of Anjanette Young, the target police were looking for lived in another unit in her apartment complex. She had never even heard of him, but she was the one who ended up held in handcuffs at gunpoint. A dozen police body cameras trained on her the whole time. The proposed ordinance calls for CPD to promptly turn over body cam videos to victims like Young upon request. Video of her raid was withheld for over a year. When the city finally turned it over, 6 key recordings were held back, including body cam video from the first officer to burst in and point a gun at her.
They withheld 6 videos, key videos from you. Do you remember that moment when that rifle was pointed right at you?
In that moment, I believe that he would have shot me if I'd have done anything different than just stand there with my hands up.
So do you think they deliberately withheld these videos from you?
This is a very clear pattern, and sadly, these are the same people who withheld videos from families in the past and media outlets. They did everything within their power, as we learned, to keep this video from Ms. Young after she had properly filed a FOIA request.
We're looking for our privacy rights to be maintained, for our human rights to be upheld, but we've seen from these wrong raids that that is not the case. So that's what our ordinance is trying to cure for.
Haddon is one of 5 alderwomen sponsoring the ordinance. They're backed by 7 community groups that helped draft it, with University of Chicago law professor Craig Futterman.
The need for the ordinance is urgent. This isn't something that we can all afford to wait on. Families are being traumatized now. People are getting hurt.
In addition to the body cam video release requirement, the ordinance lays out 19 other reforms, including a mandate that raid teams must knock and announce themselves, giving people at least 30 seconds to get to the door.
Search warrant, Chicago Police!
In our ongoing investigation, CBS 2 uncovered multiple raids where police just busted in.
There was no time for me to consider that I didn't have clothes on.
The ordinance also calls for raids to be conducted between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. and for officers to do surveillance to make sure kids are not home at the time.
Please do not shoot me.
It will also require every officer on a raid to wear a body camera and keep it rolling until the raid is over.
Let's go to cameras.
Kill cameras!
We've seen from the reporting that you guys have done, right, from the investigations, that this is not the case.
So this ordinance is basically going to force the Chicago Police Department to make it a policy if it passes.
It's more than just a policy, right? It's more than just an executive order even. It really becomes part of what our laws govern in our city. More grounds to demand the type of enforcement and compliance that we want to see.
I wanted to fight to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else.
The ordinance will require the detailed tracking of all police raids. They must log the race of the people raided and must report if children were involved or if force was used. Informants who give bad information will be banned from future use. And finally, if doors are broken, the city must be out to fix them within hours. Dave Savini, CBS 2 Investigators.
It was a CBS 2 investigation that gained international attention. Tonight, Dave Savini walks us through the 16-month COPA investigation, detailing what police did wrong, and it's a lot.
It's been more than 2 years since the terrifying raid on her home. Anjanette Young says she's been waiting all this time for someone to be held accountable for the wrong raid on her apartment on Chicago's West Side in February of 2019. A wrong raid where she was handcuffed naked, humiliated, and traumatized. The officers also had handguns and rifles pointed at her. COPA released a statement saying it is now referring its findings to CPD Superintendent David Brown for review.
I'm annoyed that it took as long as it did. It's hurtful.
But a glimmer of some justice does appear to be coming for Young. Sources say COPA found at least 100 allegations of police misconduct during their investigation of the botched raid.
It is a big deal when you hear 100 allegations of misconduct.
I absolutely believe that there's something that they uncovered when they mentioned, 100 allegations. My concern is what will they do about it? Will they be outlined in a way that these officers are held accountable for that? What are the consequences of these 100 allegations?
COPA did point out there were significant deficiencies in the way the search warrant was obtained and executed, something the CBS 2 investigators have been exposing for years. How police simply took the word of a confidential informant and did not independently verify they had the right address. In Young's case, the target of the raid actually lived next door and was wearing an electronic monitoring device, so police should have known where he was all along.
We know what the problems with using confidential informants are, that they typically have something to kind of repay the police. And so they have an incentive to tell the police anything to kind of get some of the heat off of them, quite frankly.
Young was also upset that specific details of what COPA found were not released in today's report.
That report does not support the pain and the suffering and the trauma that I have experienced from that night.
Superintendent Brown now has 60 days to agree or disagree with COPA's findings. He could ask for more time at that point, or he can ask for help in making a decision by an arbitrator appointed by the police board. Dave Savini, CBS 2 Investigators.
CBS 2 investigators were first to expose the 2019 wrong raid on Anjanette Young. To see all of our reporting on this story, check out the CBS 2 Investigators section in our CBS Chicago app.
2 years ago this week, we broke the story of Anjanette Young. We were later the first to expose the shocking video of the botched raid.
Tonight, we're learning about possible discipline for the officers involved. CBS 2 investigator Dave Savini walks us through what could be the first steps towards accountability.
I'm not moving until you show me something!
Anjanette Young demands to see the warrant that led to the invasion by dozens of male officers into her apartment in February of 2019. Her raid was one of 50-plus botched raids uncovered during our now 3-year-long probe. The handling of that warrant led to the two biggest recommended punishments. The two supervisors who were supposed to oversee how the bad search warrant was obtained. One was on the scene, Sergeant Alex Walensky.
This is 164 North Hermitage.
It is!
He was recommended a year suspension up to separation, meaning fired. He also is accused of leaving her handcuffed for 20 minutes. Also recommended for a year suspension and separation was a sergeant not on the scene that night, Sergeant Corey Petracco. Petracco was in supervision of this officer, Elaine Aparango.
Just relax, all right?
Aparango was the affiant, meaning he was the officer who got the warrant to raid Anjanette Young's apartment. Petracco should have done more to make sure Aparango did all the required legwork. Petracco's lack of supervision was referred to as troubling, and Aparango was considered the most culpable for harm Anjanette Young experienced because Aparango believed a John Doe informant without properly checking the address where an illegal gun was supposedly being stored. COPA's findings also reveal Aparango failed to perform due diligence to check out the tip properly. There were numerous other findings of misconduct. The result, a recommendation of a 180-day suspension up to separation, meaning fired.
Chicago Police
More misconduct was sustained during the entry for not giving Young enough time to answer the door before busting in and pointing guns at Young and handcuffing her. The officer in the mask, Gabriel Cruz, who helped cover Young at one point, was singled out for lessening the harm to Anjanette Young, but he was also given a 60-day suspension recommendation for failing to abide by the knock and announce rule. Another officer, Michael Donnelly, was hit with a recommendation for a 15-day suspension for an unrelated search he did of another person's car while in the parking lot behind Young's apartment. Donnelly was cited for an improper search and for failing to properly activate his body camera. Now, Superintendent David Brown has already moved to terminate Sergeant Walensky. Sources tell the CBS 2 investigators other officers will likely face suspensions. They all have a right to appeal. In the newsroom, Dave Savini, CBS 2 investigators.
And to see our award-winning reporting on this case and the overall pattern of wrong raids by Chicago police, head to cbschicago.com/Anjanette Young.